Alright, so now we're going to hem the blouse. So what we want to do is we're going to stay stitch around the bottom edge of our hem first. So open up your facing, okay, your blouse front facing, and we're going to stay stitch at 3/8 of an inch. So at 3/8 of an inch, you stay stitching around from the front, one front all the way around through center back to the other front. And again, make sure your center back is open, okay? Or sorry, your center fronts are open. And make sure when you stay stitching that your side seams don't get pushed in the opposite direction that you press them, okay? So those facings have to be open, all right? If you stay stitch them closed, then you're gonna have issues. Now, this stay stitching is a guide, all right? Notice where my facing closes. That's where I'm gonna start pressing up against my stay stitching. Right, so I'm not starting right at center front. I close my facing to see where it starts, or excuse me, where the facing stops, and that's where I start pressing up the hem. And you can go a little beyond that if you need to. And again, that stay stitching is what I'm using as a guide to press this up. Okay, there we go. I went a little beyond. All right. Now what I'm going to do, I've pressed it up once. I'm going to press it up again. So I'm going to turn that cut edge, right? I'm going to turn that right inside so it's right against the crease. All right, be careful not to make it too big or too small. You want it, so you're basically turning it up 3/8 of an inch again. And then give that a press. All right, now that we've pressed it all up twice, we're going to come to our front facing, and we're going to fold it back on itself. So fold it so it's right sides together. So here's my front facing. There's the line I pressed into it, you know, my basting line. I'm going to fold it right on that basting line in the opposite direction. Make sure it's good and flat. Remember, you have 3 notches there, okay? You have the center one that you basted and then 2 outside ones. Bring the 2 outside ones together and pin it in place. Okay, so again, we're taking our blouse front facing, the attached facing, and we're putting right sides together. So we're basically folding it inside out. And you're going to do this to both sides. And notice my hem that I pressed up, it's kind of, I opened it up a little bit. So again, fold that back on itself and pin it in place. And make sure your hem is opened up for an inch or two, you know, where we pressed it up twice. Just unroll it for about an inch or two after the facing for now, like I'm doing. Now let's sew this together. All right, we're just going to sew to the end of where that facing is folded back, and we're going to stitch at 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so back tack at the beginning and end, and stitch at 3/4 of an inch, and do that to both sides. And your 3/4 of an inch stitching should line up right with where the seam will eventually be turned up all the way. Okay, you may or may not have a crease there, depending on the fabric that you have. I have very light fabric, so I kind of have a crease where the hem will be turned up in the end. But again, you'll just put your, you'll back tack on both on your stitching line on both sides, beginning and end, and stitch to all the way to where you can see it better here, where the facing stops, and that's where you want to stop stitching. Alright, so now that 3/4 inch seam allowance, I'm just going to flip it inside out and make sure everything's lining up correctly. Make sure it finishes even with the hem that you pressed up. It does. So I'm going to turn it back right inside out. And I'm going to trim back this seam allowance here on the facing. Okay, so first so I'm going to clip down the corner, and then about a ½ inch away from the edge of my facing, I'm going to clip all the way down to my stitching line. I'm just checking it again. Okay, good. So now what I'm going to do is trim out this seam allowance. So here's where I'm clipping it down to a ½ inch away, and now I'm trimming it down to a 1/4 on the inside of that facing. All right, and then I clip this down right here and grab my point turner and push it right side out. Okay, and that looks good. And I'll do the same to this other side now. Clip down on my corner, reduce that seam allowance because it all has to fold in there. About a ½ inch away from the edge of my facing, clip down to the stitching line, and now I'll trim my seam allowance back to a 1/4 inch. Okay, then fold this side out, and then use your point turner. And there we go. Alright, now we're going to stitch the rest of our hem up, and we're going to stitch right on the edge of where it's folded up. Okay, and now stitch it about a 1/16 of an inch away from the top of it. And notice I'm starting after my facing. If you want to start at the edge of your bodice front and go from one side all the way around to the other side, you're welcome to do that. I'm just doing it from the end of one facing to the beginning of the other facing, as you'll see here in the video. And just keep it nice and straight. And again, do it about a 1/16 of an inch away from the top of that edge of the hem that we pressed up. Alright, now it's been stitched. Go ahead and give it a good press from one edge all the way to the other. Do it on the wrong side. Your hem is now complete. So now we'll go to creating our constructing the sleeves and attaching them. We're very close to being done with the model blouse.